There has been a lot of talking about Nick Saban's Alabama team. Anytime a team doesn't reach expectations, and Alabama's expectations are extremely high, both internally and externally, a lot of conversation gets geared towards the head coach. And Paul Finebaum, who's one of the best in the game, in my opinion, said on ESPN that he believes that the dynasty window is closing for Nick Saban. To paraphrase, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but the implication for me watching that video was Paul Finebaum is insinuating that Nick Saban is maybe starting to lose his touch. He's 71. They've lost 2 of the last 3. They don't look like a typical Alabama team out there. And so there's a little bit of this uneasiness, and everyone's quick to press that button, right? Hey, is Nick Saban done? Is he finally going to be out of the throne as the gold standard in college football? There's a lot of other programs making a push right now. We just talked about it. Georgia's probably the best football team. Not probably. They are the best football team in the country right now. Ohio State, always going to be a factor. LSU's pushing right now to be something special in the next few years. But let's all come back down to earth just a little bit. Because how many times have we heard this about Nick Saban? Multiple. Actually, I'll illustrate it here in a second. Lane Kiffin probably said it the best in his press conference this past week, talking about Alabama getting ready for them. He says, we talked about rat poison and how you say good things about Alabama, and then they, maybe they do, maybe they don't take that rat poison. It impacts how they play. All the things being said right now, tell you what they are, they're goat fuel. And I think he's onto something. Outside of just 2022, can we debunk this whole thought that Nick Saban is somehow on the decline? I hope at the end of the segment that we're on the same page. First of all, the overall record, if you want to get into that, the numbers, 87% win percentage. Men lie, women lie. I promise your kids at home lie. That number don't lie, folks. The guy's a winner. He knows how to win. He's stood the test of time at Alabama. The game of football has changed a lot since he's been the head coach there, and they've continued to win. Like I already mentioned, we've heard this whole song before. Hey, Nick Saban's kind of lost his touch. They made a playoff. What about that now for Alabama? They can't just run the table anymore and be in the national championship. They got to play a playoff game. What's going to happen? Let's talk about this. In 2010, Alabama had 3 losses. Wow, Nick Saban's done, right? Wrong. In 2011, they won the national title. 2014, they lost in the college football playoff, lost to the eventual champion Ohio State Buckeyes. Playoff changes things for Saban, right? We're all in agreement. Hey, they had the old system rigged. That's what it was. They were able to kind of rig the BCS in their favor, right? Wrong. In 2015, they won a national title in the playoff era. In 2019, they had 2 losses, and that's when we were all sounding the alarm, right? We were all starting to buy into that. Hey, the game's passed them by. Just the way it is, 2020, they won the national title. So if history is our teacher here, Nick Saban's not taking a step back, just take a step back. If anything, this Alabama program is taking a step back to slingshot forward. I don't know if you can get any, money on betting Alabama for 2023 to win the national title. I'm not saying you should. I'm not saying you shouldn't. But if you buy into that history of what that's told us from Alabama, Nick Saban in the past, might not be the worst place to put a few dollars. All right? So the whole, hey, he's done. We've heard this before. Alabama will always... let's say this, for the foreseeable future, under Nick Saban, Alabama will have the best ingredients in college football when it comes to the recruiting trail. Because in some respect, that matters a lot. Like Georgia versus Tennessee a couple weeks ago, I guess it was only last weekend now, feels like a few weeks ago. What do we say? They've stacked 5-star classes upon each other. And that's what showed itself in terms of depth, in terms of talent. Like that showed up on the field. Same thing for Alabama. Allow me to talk through these classes with you for a second. I believe we have a graphic for it. The On3 consensus team recruiting rankings for Alabama since 2019 are as follows. In 2019, number 1 class. In 2020, number 2 class. In 2021, they're the number 1 class. In 2022, they're the number 2 class. In 2023, at the time of us being live, they currently have the number 1 class in the country. So, in terms of getting the best talent to Tuscaloosa, check. They're going to be in the top tier in that regard. And then you say, okay, well, that's great. A lot of programs can recruit talent. Like, talent's great, but what's talent for you if you don't develop it? They develop talent just fine in Tuscaloosa. Since he's been there, 39, not draft picks, 39 first-round picks, 106 total NFL picks. So they're getting the talent, they're processing that effectively and correctly, and getting the most out of it. Translation, Alabama, just from a personnel standpoint, regardless of the year-to-year fluctuation, they're going to consistently be in that top tier, which will allow you to, in my opinion, be competitive at a top-tier level. And that just can't be overstated. Like, you have to recruit with the best to be the best. And Nick Saban and company continue to recruit with the best, and they continue to be in that conversation of being the best, even with the 2 losses this year. Let's not panic. Here's probably the most important thing for me when it comes to Nick Saban and the whole conversation around him falling off. Nick Saban has stood the test of time as one of the best in the game because of his ability to adapt. A perfect example, let's talk about Lane Kiffin. In 2013, Alabama plays a Sugar Bowl game against Oklahoma. They get it handed to them. Everyone's talking about, hey, Alabama can't play the style that they want to play anymore. They can't just go get the biggest, baddest guys and run power every play. The game is changing. So what does Nick Saban do? He adapts. He pivots. He brings on an assistant coach by the name of Lane Kiffin. Maybe you've heard of him. Maybe you haven't. We mentioned him earlier in this segment. Plot twist there, or spoiler there. In 2014, they hired Lane Kiffin. In 2015, they changed the entire offense. They win the national title. Nick Saban's not stuck in his ways. He's going to adapt with the game. And guess another way that the game is changing. The college football landscape is changing. Transfer portal. You don't think the transfer portal is going to help Alabama shore up some of those weaknesses, quote unquote, of their program right now? I promise you, they will go out in the offseason and pretty much take whoever and whatever they want from the portal that's going to help them. And has it been a home run on every single transfer they've gotten this year? Not necessarily. But you would look up and down that roster and say the majority of the transfers that they did get in have made a positive impact. Now, the efficacy of that impact is probably up for the debate with certain individuals, but that's a whole other conversation. But Jahmyr Gibbs, dog. Eli Ricks, I think he's going to help that secondary a lot in the back quarter of this season. I think you're going to see him be a tremendous matchup advantage for them. Like, there's a lot of things about this program going forward for Alabama into the future with Nick Saban that are going to be in good places because of the transfer portal. If you're in the portal and you want to go play in the NFL, which is likely one of the reasons why you jump in the portal to begin with, is to help your professional stock, Alabama's probably one of the 2 to 3 places you're considering. If Alabama will have you, I don't know the odds on this, but I would venture to say they're pretty high on you going to Alabama. So all that's to say, in terms of the way the game is changing, Nick Saban and Alabama are in really good position to be able to get some good things done. And in really good position to stay in that top tier form going forward. So what you can expect after this season, because everyone's going to say, okay, well, that's great. I understand the future is maybe looking solid for Alabama. Like, you've convinced me a little bit of what's true about Alabama so far and what history teaches us. Okay, that's great. But what about right now, JD? What about what they got at the coordinator spot? Here's what I would say to that. I would expect there to be changes at the coordinator spot for Alabama going forward. Now, I'm not saying they're going to fire Pete Golding. I'm not saying they're going to fire Bill O'Brien. But by nature of what Alabama is, when you're a coordinator at a school like that, jobs become available. And I get the feeling that there will be at least 1, if not 2, new coordinators for Alabama going forward. I'm not saying that's going to hurt them. I'm not saying it's going to help them. I'm just saying if that's your frustration, I don't think you'll be frustrated too much longer this time next year. All right? So, to round this whole thing out, if you're out on Nick Saban, if you think he's declining, if you think the dynasty window is closing, quote unquote, I have a hard time agreeing with you. I just think that's, quite frankly, untrue. If history's our teacher, when he takes a step back, his team takes several steps forward. He adjusts better than anybody in the game, and they get the best players in the game. Need I say more? So Nick Saban is not going anywhere. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.